The Canadian men's national team set to play Guatemala in the quarterfinals, and a bit of a surprise for Guatemala because you looked at that other group and you saw Jamaica and Panama thinking that that's probably going to be the teams that advance considering the qualities on a Jamaica side, but they continue to trip over themselves, and Guatemala is through as the second team in that group. Canada with a very good chance against Guatemala, but this is going to be another physical and borderline violent game, most likely, with Guatemala trying to scrape out a result against this Canadian team. And the winner will face either the U.S. men's national team or Costa Rica in the semifinal. So the tournament gets real, at least in the semifinal, but the quarterfinal Canada does get off a little bit easier than a lot of their opponents, because even Mexico, who won the group, gets Saudi Arabia, and that's not going to be an easy test considering what Saudi have done at the last few tournaments, including, as some people forget, beating Argentina in the 2022 World Cup before Argentina went on to win that. Canada have reached 5 straight Gold Cup quarterfinals, but have just 2 semifinal appearances in the last 11 Gold Cups. And this is the first time in the Gold Cup era since 1991 that Guatemala have back-to-back quarterfinal appearances after topping that group that included Canada in the 2023 to reach the quarterfinals. But Canada finally back in the quarterfinals. Guatemala, what do you see in this game?
Yeah, this is going to be a chippy test. I think this Guatemala team, they really strike me as like a mid 2010s Honduras like team, or even like that 2022 El Salvador team in World Cup qualifiers, where they're plucky, they have good chemistry, they have an identity, and they stick to it. And I think sometimes that's what you need in CONCACAF. I think that's been the real strength of a lot of the Central American teams over the years. And anytime that teams have tried to move away from that's where they struggle. And Guatemala is a fascinating one because, of course, we have to remember they were banned at the end of the 2010s by FIFA due to some, corruption and stuff going on in their federation.
Corruption in soccer?
Yeah,
never heard of that.
Right? Who would have thought? Especially in the 2010s, it was a bit of a wild time for the sport globally. So yeah, Guatemala, they've bounced back incredibly for that. And because of all that, they were in like League C when they started Nations League, and now they're about to be in their 3rd straight League A season. Like that stuff like that's very impressive. Back-to-back quarterfinals, like we mentioned, is a record. They have a genuine shot at making their first ever World Cup. So for Canada, what I expect is a plucky test. Like this Guatemala team, 18 of their players are from Guatemala. Again, that's the theme. We see a lot of these Central American teams, a lot of identity of guys who play together domestically. Interestingly, they're very young. I think the stat is 13 players or 25 or younger. So this is also a Guatemala team that's been building and is building, but they've also got some intriguing players that are, playing outside of Guatemala. Of course, they got a defender in the Romanian league, which is kind of cool. Of course, got Rubio Mendez Rubin, I think he's going by now, the former RSL striker playing in the USL. He's got a good strike rate. They've got a couple guys in MLS academies, MLS Next Pro team. So no, this Guatemala team, I think it's a test Canada should win on paper. Guatemala is not going to be able to offer them much, but I think this is going to be a very competitive game because Guatemala, they're going to come back, sit down, 4-4-2, muck it up, be physical. And that's never an easy game to play, as Canada have learned.
Rubio being certainly a striker that has punished teams across MLS, now playing with the Charleston Battery in the USL as well. And that's a player that could cause some troubles for this Canadian team. You also have Aaron Herrera, DC United right back. Not that DC United has been a very good team in MLS over the last little while, but it's not a complete right off this Guatemala side as some of the other teams in the Gold Cup, especially in the group stage, can be. But the goalkeeper position for Guatemala could be one to watch as well. Nicholas Hagen, the backup for the Columbus Crew, who let 5 goals in, including passing the ball right to Lionel Messi against Inter Miami a few weeks ago. He is not on this roster anymore after picking up an injury against Guadeloupe in the group stage. So they're going to be playing some very young and very inexperienced keepers when they take on Canada.
Yeah, well, I think the option is a 23-year-old with 2 caps. So I think I'd expect him because the other option is a 30-year-old with no caps. So I would suggest you see the 23-year-old. And so for Canada, I think that's something you want to put them under pressure. Standing out from Canada's numbers in the group stage, they had 17 shots against Honduras, and then they had only, 6 against Curacao, even against El Salvador. It was, they didn't get enough shots. But I think for Guatemala, this is going to force them to defend even more. You're going to want to protect your goalkeeper. You don't want him to be thrown to the wolves against a Canadian team with the Davids, Oluwase, Buchanan, Schaffelberg, right? You don't want this poor youngster to kind of get thrown in and have a forgettable moment. So I think this is going to inspire the Guatemalans to defend more. And I think that's going to be a really good challenge for Canada. They need to get used to breaking down these low blocks. So it's going to be fascinating to see. Because that's why it's something on one hand, you see news like that and you're like, advantage Canada, but not always. You always see it in tournaments like this when there are these rare moments where you have to turn to a second and third goalkeeper. It can both inspire the guy to step up and prove, hey, maybe I'm worth more of a look than the regular guy. And it also inspires the defenders in front of him to step up.
What kind of a lineup do you think Canada might look at? I think the biggest question is probably what's that midfield pivot, because you could easily see Matthew Choinière, Nico Sigor, and Nathan Saliba all starting, but there's only two positions to grab in that midfield.
Yeah, I think that's going to be the spot of question, I suppose we can call it, for Jesse Marsch, because I think the back line will be settled. I think you've just kind of run back what you did, especially that you got Cornelius and Johnston rest in that second half. Plus, you kind of get that extra day with the game being on Sunday. So I expect the back four to be settled. Goalkeeper, granted, there is a question. At the same time, the fact Dane Sinclair got the two bigger games, quote unquote, I guess, and the fact it is Minnesota, it is a bit of a hometown, so to speak, for Dane Sinclair. I think he's going to go in. But yeah, the midfield, like you mentioned, it feels like Saliba getting a rest. You want to see him back in. You want to see Choinière because he's been so good. But how do you drop Seeger out of the group with the group stage he's had? That's why I do genuinely wonder if we might see Seeger, Saliba, Choinière. And I say that because if Guatemala is going to sit back, they don't have the most pace in their team either. Maybe you can get away with having a bit more of a technical player instead of a pure burner out wide. And then, yeah, I think up front, I do wonder if you go Tani Oluwase as well. They've kind of been rotating between him and Promise David, Oluwase in Minnesota. Maybe this is what he needs to get a bit of home cooking of his own. So those are probably how I see those lineup decisions playing out. Of course, Tejan Buchanan will stay in. Jonathan David will also stay in.
And when you look at that goalkeeping situation as well, Maxime Crépeau didn't really have to do much in that game in their last group stage finale against El Salvador. Dane Sinclair's looked good. I think he's probably the starter for this Canadian team in the moment right now.
Yeah, I think he probably is, but Crépeau, makes it interesting. It's tough for Crépeau. You kind of feel bad for him because you would have liked him to get more of an audition against El Salvador. Like, he genuinely got no audition. What was it? 2 shots, none on target. No, 80% possession. Canada was so far up the field. It's not like he was getting on the ball either, because El Salvador's block was so low. But because I'd want to still see Crépeau get some looks and just kind of throw a bit of a mix into this battle. But I think Sinclair's just grabbed a bit of the edge based on the club form and based the fact that he's got the net more this year than Crépeau has, and especially as of late. So I think Jesse Marsch will continue to ride with that.
And when you're looking at this bracket as well, a few really enticing matchups. I'm looking forward to seeing that US-Costa Rica semifinal, because we might be looking at a Canada versus USA semifinal here at the Gold Cup, which could be exciting in so many realms, especially because this American team is a beatable one. I think any American team is very much a beatable one in this moment, especially for Canada. And then you look at the last Gold Cup, which was Jacob Schaffelberg's breakout. I still remember that left-footed strike from the half space. We've talked about that area, and it was just a piss missile. I've used that term a few times now, but that was like the definition of that term for Canada. I think it was in Cincinnati, and former NFP host Peter Galindo was on the Canadian national team staff for that, and I remember him telling us some stories of that game. But that would be a fantastic matchup if Canada were to take on the USA in a semifinal.